Su Run was a powerful genius whose talent was admired by many from the day he was first born. He ended up with his master after a series of twists and turns where he was kidnapped by several sects and greater influences who wanted his talent for themselves. In reality, his master wasn't some saint, but a great thief and someone whose name was dreaded by most. He never planned to pick up a disciple, but since fate allowed it, he did too. Su Run was raised in this kind of environment, where he was exposed to many things from a young age and learned the world from the perspective of someone who wasn't jaded or possessed by its social structures. Still, it was hard to not grow arrogant when one was a supreme talent. Su Run grew faster than any of his peers and took his #1 spot on the dimensional leaderboard by the time he turned 60, something impossible for normal people. And as a testament to his power, he held that spot for an entire decade. That's when he met Bai Yuma, the Saint King, for the first time. Bang! Show! 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 The longer Su Ren and Bai Yuma's battle went on, the more frenzied it became. It was hard to distinguish who sent which attacks, or who was getting hurt or disadvantaged by the situation as their bodies intertwined in a dance of death. Hundreds of strikes were exchanged by the second, and complex laws were thrown about like trash on the street. Even the demigods maintaining the barrier couldn't hide their shock and admiration for the level of collision taking place on its grounds. Su Ren's eyes were narrowed into pinholes as they dashed around and took account of the surroundings. His blades never stopped their motions even when Bai Yuma wasn't in front of him, sending waves upon waves of pure gray blade intent raising through the arena itself. These scars seemed useless, but the Saint King knew better than anyone how dangerous they were. Each one became a geyser of Su Ren's energy, stealthily corrupting the arena itself with its aura and subjecting Bai Yuma to the full force of its invasive properties. "I see you've mastered this little skill," he said as he swerved through the minefield of mana and approached Su Ren's body. "However, this is not what you promised last time." He brandished his weapon, a sleek and ornate fan made of unknown metal, and sliced it through the air. "Cook!" Su Ren gritted his teeth as he was pushed back. He clenched his muscles and used mana to forcefully close the gash in his chest as he shot back into combat. "How could you understand what I promised?" Su Ren replied coldly, crossing his swords and twisting them in a strange way as he slashed out. Coiling serpents, dance. It was a mystical scene. The two blades extended as if they had no physical limits and turned into living manifestations of snakes that cut into Bai Yuma's body and pushed him away. Su Ren didn't stop his charge, jumping up in the air and raising his blades above his head as he charged an extreme amount of mana into his arms. He descended like a shooting star, his body burning with powerful light as he barreled towards the ground. Someone like you could never understand true ambition. Meteor descent. Bang! It was a move he'd invented recently after seeing a world destroyed by the impact of a single meteor's fall. And his current opponent was the best one to test it on. Su Ren slammed down into the surface of the dead star, his blades slamming into Bai Yuma's body heavily. "Take it, knock scum." "Humph. This much is nothing." Bai Yuma was an interesting opponent. Unlike the rest Su Ren had faced to this day, he didn't back down in the face of death. It was something Su Ren came to respect as they fought, despite the fact that the opponent was an unreconcilable enemy. And as if his grit wasn't enough, he was also incredibly powerful. Su Ren had never met someone in his life who could stand face to face with him and confidently say they wouldn't lose in a fight until he met this Nox being. "I won't allow a foreign invader like you to stand at the top of this universe. That spot is reserved solely for me." His words were powerful and supported by power. Bai Yuma, just like Su Ren, had never seen an opponent like him. It was one of his first true excursions into Grand Heaven's boundary. Before this, he'd been corralled around by his seniors and forced to fight against genius after genius to raise his standing in the universe and accomplish his final task of topping the dimensional leaderboard. This was an important step in his father's plans, a move to divide and humiliate the opposition, and he understood that his place in it was extremely important. However, he wanted to experience these things alone. He didn't want to just say there were none worthy of him. He wanted to prove that he was an existence who couldn't be touched, whether within or without the universe. Su Run was the final obstacle in his way, and while he wanted to win this fight justly, he didn't think he could do so without ruining his father's plans. Su Ren and Bai Yumo respected each other's strength, but they were destined to be enemies from the start. And with Bai Yumo prioritizing the Nox's plans over their battle, the respect they had for each other shattered. Boom! The force of Su Ren's meteor descent burst the entire arena floor into chunks of debris that chaotically buzzed through the air as they were swept up by the mana currents. At the center of the impact zone, Su Ren and Bai Yumo stood at a standstill. Su Ren pushed forward with the force he accumulated, while Bai Yumo used the force of the earth to support himself while he blocked Su Ren's blades with his open fan. Scree! The metal of their weapons screeched and sparked as they fought for dominance. Su Ren and Bai Yumo never broke eye contact, their gazes holding a number of unknown emotions. Even as they stood in this deadlock, their auras clashed and ruined the environment further, neither of them willing to give up their edge. If their fates were different, perhaps they could have even been friends in this life. But this was not possible, because just as Su Ren put training above all else, the Saint King put his father above any and everything. He was nothing more than a slave to that man's whims, but he was totally content with this status for some odd reason. Su Ren couldn't understand it as someone with the independent mindset of a practitioner, and it felt like every time they fought their beliefs were challenged and placed on the table to debate each other. Whether it was right to be independent and grow on the path one believed best, or whether it was best to grow under an umbrella and never leave its shade. Or was it simpler? Perhaps at the very core of the matter, it didn't matter what their beliefs were. They merely refused to lose to each other. It was a relationship that Su Ren once had hoped for, but as time passed and as he faced Bai Yumo now, he realized it wasn't possible, because that man would never change his ways. How did the battle end? Su Ren could have sworn he was just fighting, but in the next instant, he found himself on the ground, unable to move or control his mana. He gripped his chest, feeling the disgusting energy swimming within. He sat on the dead star alone and slammed his fist into the ground with hatred in his eyes. He'd been defeated by cheap means and left for dead without an ounce of respect. At this moment, he lost his #1 spot on the dimensional leaderboard without an ounce of resistance. The grand things he'd said during that battle, were they all meaningless? In the end, there was no such thing as fairness in this world at all. Not then, and certainly not now. How did Bai Yumo win the first time? Actually, the battle was extremely anticlimactic. Because while Su Ren and Bai Yumo definitely started out fighting valiantly with their lives on the line, they ended with one poisoned and the other disappeared. The mana Bai Yumo left in Su Ren's body that day never left him. In fact, the growth path of his unique mana was shifted entirely for the sake of suppressing and controlling that mana so it didn't spread further and cripple him. This was why it specialized in the spirit. It was directly suppressing whatever strange existence that mana was and keeping Su Ren alive while maintaining its external advantages. Still, that mana was impossible to cure, even for his master. And today, almost following the exact same flow of events. Cook! Su Ren inadvertently coughed, his face pale. The mana in his chest was acting up again. Or rather, it was being excited. He looked down at Bai Yumo hatefully, his blades still entwined with the latter's fan, and gritted his teeth in anger. Again, this is the strategy you use. Su Ren was almost certain this moment would come, but he wanted to hope it didn't. He didn't want to lose here because of an old crippling injury. He didn't want to show this side to the people who admired him, but he acted on his hope, because he wanted to see it get crushed. Only then could he throw away the respect he once had for this man. Swoosh! While Bai Yumo watched, Su Ren jumped away and retreated to the very end of the arena, shocking those who thought he held the advantage in the previous attack when he vomited a mouthful of black blood. Apologies, but this is not a fight for our entertainment. I have already mentioned this. Our purpose is to crush you thoroughly and make sure you don't have the face to rebel anymore. Bai Yumo's response was cold and direct. Human emotions were reserved for humans. There weren't many other races who could see people so individualistically and hope for their redemption regardless of hatred or opposition. The Nox? The only such emotions they knew were negative. Sportsmanship simply didn't exist to them, and there was no such thing as sacred in this world. Su Ren sighed. He exited the arena quietly without addressing anyone, turning his eyes to the hidden Death Valley seats. He, the Blade God, never had a chance against the man who could control his greatest weakness. But it wasn't just him anymore. Do not gloat for too long. This stage is no longer mine, Su Ren said with a smile, leaving Bai Yuma curious. Was he saying there was someone else? At that moment, Bai Yuma suddenly caught his father's expression out of the corner of his eye. He's grinning. He wasn't stupid enough to believe his father was proud of him or grinning because of his victory. So you're the Saint King I've been hearing so much about. Pretty cool powers, but you use them in the bitchiest way possible. It's almost a shame for them to be yours. A voice came from the side of the atrium. Damien stood up and jumped into the arena, slamming his foot on the shattered floor and spreading a wave of mana through it. Rumble. Instantly, it was like time reversed. The arena restored itself to peak condition within seconds, and Bai Yuma could feel a portion of the energy he used returning to him. This you are? He asked. Me? I'm the reason your dad brought you here, Damien responded condescendingly. You? Bai Yuma wanted to demean Damien, but he couldn't ignore the fact that his father's smile was growing wider with every word the man said. Is it true? His father said he'd find an unexpected surprise in Luxurian, and seeing that Su Ren was still corrupted, it clearly wasn't him. That meant this man was someone his father considered better than Su Ren. No, his father never placed Su Ren in his eyes. So what did this man have? What made him special? You're staring at me pretty hard, huh? Did you fall in love or something? Quiet. Bang. Bai Yuma sent an abrupt burst of mana at Damien. A burst that exploded within sparks of an instant and didn't give him any time to dodge. However, chill. You should definitely recuperate your mana before we fight. I don't want you to say I cheated later. Damien's voice came from several tens of meters away, far closer than he was originally. Bai Yuma almost lost composure. He saw everyone and everything as below him except one person. His father. His father was a great emperor that even other emperors feared. His father was the definition of absolute power. Now that someone that very man respected and anticipated appeared, Bai Yuma's entire world was thrown for a loop. How was he supposed to approach this battle? Damien didn't plan to give him a chance to decide. You're a man who likes to use tricks to win, right? Then I'll show you a few tricks. Perhaps a few days ago he would have been wary of this fight, but now he was no longer the same. Hassan allowed him to reach the second revolution, and though Damien didn't feel like anything had changed, he felt like his mindset and presence were gradually shifting outside his perception. The current him didn't need to be afraid of the Saint King in the slightest. Damien turned to the Saint Emperor with a smirk. Is your butler doing well? Quite fine. He is thoroughly enjoying the presents you gave him last time. Oh? Then he should have come. I've been dying to see him again. Haha. I'm sure he's the same, however. Today is not his day, is it? I see. So I should give those gifts to your dear son instead. Be gentle with him. Damien rolled his eyes at the obvious sarcasm in the man's voice. The Saint Emperor was impossible to read, and while Damien didn't want to do anything that would progress his plans, what other choice did he have? He wasn't just avenging Su Ren, but protecting the universe's face. It sounds like a matter of pride, but it's much more serious than that. Damien glanced back at Bai Yuma, who had yet to gather his thoughts, and shook his head. It's a real shame for you. The Saint King raised his head with a frown. What is? Nothing. Since I can't face your dad yet, I'm going to have to give you the beating I've been itching to give him. Ha! Bai Yuma scoffed at the audacity. Did he think he was so great? This human? Laughable. Whether it be human, demon, or a god themselves, none would be able to stand before him, Bai Yuma, and act arrogantly. This was the creed he lived by for his entire life. The Saint King threw away his hesitation and flared his mana. It was the same inky black mana that every Nox had, but there was something else contained within it. Something far, far more vile. something that was the source of Su Ren's curse. Using all his power from the start, the Saint King pushed his foot into the ground and, bang! He sent a hammer-like punch flying toward Damien's face. Bang! Bayuma's fist was packed with all the power he'd recuperated during the short time before he attacked Damien. The just recently repaired arena floor cracked into pieces again, and the winds whipped fiercely under the fist's pressure. However, this was no trouble for Damien. He shifted his body to the left and snapped his arm out, grabbing the Saint King's wrist mid-swing and using his own momentum against him. Bang! Bayuma's body flipped under Damien's influence and slammed against the ground below. Damien followed with another punch straight to the Nox genius's stomach. Bayuma gritted his teeth in frustration at the immediate loss, but he didn't let it distract him from the battle. Damien was different from Su Ren. If the Saint Emperor liked him, he wasn't someone who could be crippled and thrown away with just a few tricks. If so, Bayuma needed to fight like he hadn't fought in a very long time. He rolled on the ground, uncaring for his appearance as he dodged Damien's terrifying fist and leapt back to his feet. Boom! The ground cracked as the shockwave of Damien's fist pushed him back a few steps. His fan sliced through the air and cut the shockwave away. In the next moment, he continued his retreat, making considerable distance between him and Damien. I must create a strategy. He observed the enemy's movements and noticed how skilled he was in physical aspects. His motions weren't rigid in the slightest, but every heavy strike that seemed wasteful was actually controlled with extreme precision. Usually, physical masters were lacking in law comprehension, but Bayuma wasn't stupid enough to believe this as absolute fact. He flared his mana and pointed his fan out, creating several inky black swords that cut through the air back towards Damien. Humph! Damien snorted as he stepped forward. He disappeared just as the swords reached his position, causing Bayuma's eyes to widen. Yo! Damien's voice came from behind, accompanied by a firm grip on the back of Bayuma's head. Didn't expect me, did you? Humph! This is not enough to defeat me. The Saint King snarled as his eyes narrowed into pinholes. To Damien's surprise, the back of his opponent's head began to melt, becoming a viscous fluid that stuck to his hand and drilled into his palm. Oh? This must be what you gave Su Ren, right? Damien allowed a bit of that mana to enter his skin before jumping away and brandishing Mirage. Void Sword Art First Form. Bladeless. Rip. Space tore in two as an atrocious gash spread through its layers. Bayuma waves his fan and created more manifestations with his mana, sending them towards the coming attack confidently. Bang! The two clashed in the air powerfully, but it meant nothing. Damien and Bayuma were already gone, continuing their combat without a single break. Damien Void, you are better than that swordsman, Bayuma commented, continuously dodging and using his fan to counterattack whenever he got the chance. If he heard you calling him a swordsman, I bet he'd come down here and beat you until you can't recognize yourself anymore. Damien responded spitefully, drawing hell and firing a thickly compressed black bullet from point-blank range. Extermination. It was the first big attack of the battle. The sweeping black light of extermination pulsed through the arena and filled it with deathly energy. When it came in contact with Bayuma, he immediately felt the burning sensation on his skin. Hiss! He looked down incredulously to find his arm corroded, his ashen gray skin almost entirely black already. You! He muttered as his fury built. You scum! Bayuma's eyes turned red in rage. His mana exploded outward powerfully. Black waves spread through the arena once more, destroying all extermination fluctuations present. Die! Bayuma slammed his hand forward, and in response, a massive shadowy figure formed behind his back. It was a manifestation of his laws. Its eyes lit up like bloody moons, shedding their light all across the arena so Damien had no means of dodging. KHH. Damien couldn't avoid getting hit, and he couldn't ignore the pain either. Now that he was fighting the man, he understood why Su Ren had so much trouble with him. At their core, they both used the same type of mana. Damien felt his spirit getting attacked by a concept he could best term torment. Every strike was filled with the pain of 1,000 cuts, yet the actual damage they did was negligible. It was the type of concept that would slowly drive one to the depths of madness in the midst of a fight. But you've met the wrong opponent this time, buddy, Damien thought with a grin. He maintained his outward wince as he traced the periphery of the arena with his movements and warily kept his eyes on Yuma, whose expression was becoming more condescending with the passing of time. He might have achieved large success with this move, but he definitely doesn't expect it to kill me. If so, Damien turned a piece of his attention inward as he teleported back into battle and pressed Yuma in melee combat. Mirage went in all directions almost impossibly. It would leave Damien's hand and swivel around from behind Yuma to attack his flank while Damien sent shots with Freya and Hel, and the longer it remained in battle, the stronger its spiritual intelligence and capabilities became. It was a mystical thing to see, almost like a sign of natural weapon evolution, but these signs were so preliminary that noting them was useless. Instead, Damien used the distraction Mirage provided to scan his internal situation and find the poison he allowed into his body. It should be this. Truly was a fearsome energy. Even though Damien was fully controlling its movements and the effect it had on his body, the area it was allowed to contaminate was thoroughly poisoned. Even Damien wouldn't be safe from a force like this if he didn't have the void physique to clear it from his body. But you probably aren't willing to do work, so I'll do it myself. The void physique was a trusty companion, but whenever Damien faced a battle that was important for his future, it always took a back seat and forced him to do things on his own. It was a method of testing and also a method of training to make Damien worthy of its full power, and at this point he didn't get angry at it anymore, because he was slowly acquiring the ability to control its facilities on his own. The same mysterious power of the void that swam through his body whenever the void physique interfered returned. But this time, its source was Damien himself. That mana encircled the contaminated area and trapped Yuma's strange mana, devouring tiny pieces of it in curiosity. If Damien was correct, this energy was Yuma's true trump card, and it wasn't so simple as an ordinary poison. So before Yuma realized that he'd corralled that energy, he needed to devour it and comprehend its inner workings. Meanwhile, the previous set of events took place in a matter of seconds. Less than a minute passed into the battle before Yuma summoned his manifestation and Damien began to barrage him. Their battle started at a far slower pace than Su Ren's previous one, and while they were also fighting fiercely, the difference in atmosphere could be felt. The reactions of the crowd could be assumed. Generally, they didn't have much complexity as they didn't hold many thoughts towards the battle. The only person who had extremely complex emotions towards it was Su Ren himself, who watched each collision from the edge of his seat. As time went on, the battle became fiercer as well. Damien and Yuma stopped testing the waters and used greater and greater amounts of mana, infusing more complex concepts into their attacks by the second. The arena was already being torn apart at a rate quicker than in the previous battle, but Su Ren had a strange feeling. This isn't the Damien I fought. The Damien he fought was far more forward and far less caring about safety. He would charge into battle with no thought of surviving unless he killed his enemy. His current cautious approach didn't feel right to Su Ren, and while the man himself didn't know it, his observation was spot on. Damien had been fighting against his usual characteristics for several reasons, but the need had already vanished. Because now, Damien had a thorough understanding of the kind of damage the Saint King could do to his body. It'll be dangerous, but what fun is there without danger? The main thing Damien noticed after their first several thousand clashes was that Yuma's mana capacity was massive, almost great enough to compete with him. Regardless of strength, if they kept fighting as they'd been, they wouldn't be finished for another day or two, and that was only if one of them ran out of mana. The Saint King has strength, but it's completely different from what I have. If I have power over the environment, he has power over living beings. The thought made him frown, but Damien didn't lose his conviction. Whatever happens, happens. His eyes instantly sharpened, and his body vanished. Void Sword Art 6th Form, Worldbreaker, Yuma had been standing steadily until this point. Despite Damien's harassment, he didn't lose his cool or lose ground in any way. Surprisingly enough, Yuma was quite the skilled melee fighter. His fan became a blade unlike any other, slashing and piercing with a sharpness that would boggle one's mind. Even Damien wasn't safe from it. Just as he'd scratched and stabbed the Saint King several times, he had many gashes covering his own body. They healed rapidly, but the pain from them spread deeper and deeper, infecting Damien's spirit and dragging him down. However, when Damien's sword came down this time, it felt different. It exploded with power that swept past by Yuma and into the earth below, exploding outward in the next instant. Similar to what Surin previously did, Damien filled the ground with his energy and created countless geysers that spewed the terrifying force into the air. Where they contrasted was that Damien didn't use these geysers to attack. But, boom! Another massive explosion went off as Damien used Worldbreaker again. Bayuma shot through the air, crashing against the arena wall as he was pushed away by the heavy mana waves. He shot to his feet and pushed forward again. But in that moment, a geyser opened up under his feet. Whap! The entire world shifted in by Yuma's perception. Before he could regain his senses, a swift wind passed by his shoulder. Shing! Damien appeared behind him with Mirage dripping in black blood. Bayuma's arm landed on the ground with a thump as the man himself stumbled out of the geyser he was standing on. Unexpectedly, it was on the complete opposite side of the arena from his original place. Bayuma was delirious from the abrupt travel through the chaotic spatial layers, something a normal person would be torn to shreds by, and he hardly felt the loss of his arm. Void Sword Art 5th Form, Dimensional Severance. A black line of light approached him from behind, bent on cutting him into two perfectly even pieces, but in that final moment, enough! Bayuma's voice was different from before. It was filled with malice and unknown darkness. The pressure from that single word banished dimensional severance to non-existence. 3 streaks crawled up both of his cheeks. His sclerae were dyed black, and a pair of devilish horns appeared on his head. No more of this. The arm he just lost regrew itself, painting a gruesome picture as Bayuma turned around to face Damien. Die, fool! Boom! An absolutely catastrophic mana pulse filled the arena. The corrosive energy the Saint King previously used as poison was now clouding the air, and the original Nox mana he used was suppressed under its shine. Damien frowned as he felt it invading his body. It was disgusting, especially since this energy was so familiar. That guy. Did he just remove a seal? That's what it felt like. His power suddenly jumped to another level, and the complexity of his laws was at a point where even Damien had to be wary. The main problem was his mana. That energy. Damien had felt it twice before. It was first inside the Void Corridor when he was being transported to the Divine Realm, and second when he was in Ion, coincidentally at the site of another Void Corridor. Damien's knowledge showed its strength here, allowing him to understand the nature of this energy instantly. It's Abyss energy. The latent energy that made up the Abyss and gave it its fearsome reputation was in the hands of the enemy. Repel. Damien's body was surrounded by several layers of spatial mana that functioned similarly to dimensional cages, except these were specialized in expelling external energies. He frowned when he saw how fast the layers were being destroyed, but there was nothing he could do about it. Until now, I've injured him a few times, but I've never struck him seriously. Even his arm being severed meant nothing in the grand scheme of things. Damien teleported continuously and observed the Saint King, who was currently covered in a suit of domineering armor made of that black yet vibrantly colorful energy of the Abyss, and by the looks of it, he was getting acclimated to the power boost he'd just received. Logic says this is the best time to attack, but logic is always wrong in situations like this. Damien kicked a loose chunk of rock out of the ground and loaded it with mana before launching it at Bayuma's body. Just as he expected, the rock was immediately trapped in an incorporeal net that broke it down to its foundational elements and absorbed it. Ha! How troublesome. Damien didn't like being a masochist, so he also didn't like entertaining that side of him. But it seemed this time, I'm going to get hurt a fucking lot. There was no escaping fate. And as Bayuma exited his trance-like state and came back to reality, the battle between Damien Void and the Saint King could finally begin in full. Bayuma was certainly a character. If one only interacted with him a few times, they'd find him someone without much personality. a person who had nothing of his own aside from his arrogant manner of looking down on the world. However, Bai Yuma was hiding much more than he showed. The Saint King wasn't someone who could be ignored as just another young master with eyes on top of his head. His current appearance was that of a death god. He was doing nothing but standing in the middle of the arena floor, breathing slowly with his eyes lightly shut. But the air around him was filled with a sense of oppression that couldn't be ignored. Hugh! He let out a deep exhale, withdrawing the aura around him until the arena became uncannily still. All eyes were on him. Without fail, the entire population of the atrium was watching with bated breaths for his next move. And he vanished. Bang! Damien's eyes widened as he felt a fist impacting his face. His body rocked to the side as he took several steps to regain his balance. But before he could, another barrage of fists attacked his face and chest. Bang! 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 Blood flew from his lips as abyss energy surrounded his body and attacked him from all sides. Damien was suddenly thrown into what felt like a blender that was trying to tear him into tiny chunks. Damn! He exclaimed inwardly, internalizing the attack force and planting his feet deep into the ground. His arms went out instinctively, crossing before his face and taking the impact of Bai Yuma's punches. He finally had a chance to rationalize the situation. He's moving too fast. It's almost faster than teleportation. No, it truly was a hair faster than teleportation, which was incredulous to even think. How could one describe speed that was quicker than instant movement? The answer was that one didn't. Boom! Damien moved his arms away and allowed Bai Yuma's fist to hit him. He used the force to push himself away, teleporting as well to make distance. He drew Mirage without waiting a second and summoned his mana. Void Sword Art Third Form. Dance of the Void. His body became incorporeal. Thousands of altar images of him filled the arena floor, blocking Bai Yuma's vision and taking his attention away from Damien's main body. Petty tricks. Bai Yuma slammed through the air and destroyed afterimage after afterimage, turning thousands into hundreds within a second. However, he didn't expect that each afterimage had the ability to attack on its own. His body was cut in several places despite the newly formed armor, a consequence of Damien's influence on space itself, but each injury healed instantly. Meanwhile, Damien's main body was flying across the arena, hidden with dimension, observing the changes in the situation solemnly. This transformation is influenced by his abyss energy. If I get too involved, I don't know how the void physique will react. Damien was a bit wary about it, since he had no intention of revealing his greatest secret in front of the entire universe. But he couldn't just sit back and do nothing because of this fear. I need to be prepared to control it. He grabbed Hel and Freya in his hands and clutched their triggers without mercy. Bang! 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 Hundreds and thousands of black and white bullets filled the air, crashing down on the ground like meteorites and raising hell. The air was filled with life and death mana in spades, the concepts of samsara creating an isolated ecosystem within the arena that removed it from the control of those outside. Damien's hands clapped together as he called forth his samsara intent and pooled an extreme amount of mana into his attack. Rotate. Boom. The life and death mana he let loose into the atmosphere swirled around the arena's periphery and formed a dome that traced the arena barrier. A set of laws was established regarding life and death. A set of laws that disallowed the concept of regeneration entirely. Damien sped through the air and approached Bai Yuma without fear, raising Mirage to chest level and pulling his arm back. Void Sword Art Second Form. Horizon Break. Bang! A hole was torn in by Yuma's armor. Black blood spilled into the arena as he roared in pain. The wound tried to heal. The Saint King's skin and bones squirmed like worms to reconnect. But another energy interfered with the process and burned anything born from that regeneration. This attack could be considered first blood, but it wasn't just Damien's win. His attack gave away his position, and Bai Yuma's eyes turned towards him like a beast who caught his prey. "You are good," he said coldly as his body vanished and appeared before Damien. Yet, it is not enough. He raised his arm above his head, gathering a ball of abyss energy, before slamming it down on Damien's chest. Damien twisted his body with gritted teeth, teleporting behind by Yuma before the attack could connect and slamming Mirage down into his neck. Boom! Mirage clashed against the Saint King's armor, screeching as it tore a gash in the thick material, but it wasn't the cause of the explosion. The abyss energy by Yuma summoned acted with a mind of its own, impossibly twisting its trajectory and hitting Damien at the same time he struck his enemy. The pain was horrible. It was like he was being swarmed by millions of ants made of poisonous mana. Damien's face twisted in pain, but he didn't let it disperse his momentum. He couldn't allow the Saint King to take any victories in this battle, whether big or small. Frozen world. Dimension shift. Space-time severance. Space and time were convoluted into something disgusting by Damien's influence. Time became inconsequential, the dimension was cut in half and then burned away, and the fabric of reality itself was torn open to consume the Saint King. Bayuma's eyes narrowed rapidly as the full force of Damien's attacks appeared in sparks of an instant. He put up a thick wall of abyss energy that swallowed the chaotic spacetime and ground it to nothingness, but it wasn't something that could be done easily. Cook! He coughed out several mouthfuls of blood as he was forced to retreat to avoid taking more damage, but Damien wasn't ready to let him go yet. Void-breathing first form, elemental war god. The void couldn't be shown, but void-breathing was a technique that could be used with or without revealing such knowledge. Because the void was all things. If it wanted to, it could disguise itself as anything. Damien's eyes turned into orbs of rainbow light as a crown of energy manifested on his head. The energies of countless elements that he had no affinity for filled his body, giving him a sense of superiority that he didn't feel the last time he used the technique. It was like, I can see the path. He grinned to himself as he charged back into combat. Once again, the entire arena became obscured to the eyes of those watching. But this time it was because there were simply too many damn explosions. Bayuma was more than a bit vexed at the moment. He pulled out a card that he'd never used before in Grand Heaven's Boundary. Yet Damien shone with a light that made it seem like nothing more than a natural progression of the battle. It was extremely annoying. To find out that there were geniuses in existence who could show such power was definitely a blow to the Saint King. He didn't know anything about Damien. If he did, maybe his shock would be even more pronounced. But it was because he didn't know Damien's reputation that he was able to view this battle the way he did. This was his stage, not the stage of some human who crawled out of the grapevine. Yet, his notion was thoroughly rejected by the terrifying multitude of explosions that surrounded him. His body was thrown from side to side by their force, and the combined effect of several elements impacted him in a way he'd never felt before. Searing pain came from all over his body, and the armor that he'd summoned so proudly, crack. Damn it! He growled as his eyes darted around in search of his enemy. The air clouded by mana was difficult to see through, but he didn't have to worry about that. His eyes shone with abyss energy and all things were turned to nothing more than particles in his eyes. His gaze panned as time seemed to slow, and he eventually found Damien's figure not far away at all. In fact, he was getting closer by the moment. Bayuma's eyes narrowed and his hand shot out. Call of the Abyss. He infused his own mana into the abyss energy to mimic its properties and spread his fingers, allowing it to naturally spread into the atmosphere. And as Damien neared, his body suddenly halted. The abyss energy in the air invaded his spiritual world and sent him into an illusion realm that mimicked the abyss itself. It was an environment many couldn't stand, but Damien wasn't the same. Crash. The illusion broke almost instantly. The abyss seemed like nothing more than a diluted version of the void, and the void could never hurt Damien. However, that split second his mind was gone was enough for Bayuma to approach and grip his face tightly. Die, human. Boom! An explosion of abyss energy tore through Damien's head, ripping his skin and muscle to shreds and even cracking his skull. It was truly a deadly move. For a second, Bayuma even thought he'd won the battle. But how could it be so easy? Damien's body began to change, almost showing signs of similarity with the Saint King's transformation. He grew and his hair turned stark white like his skin. His scara were dyed black and countless mystical runes covered his figure. Under Bai Yuma's shocked gaze, Damien's head heeled, his lips curling into a grin as soon as they appeared. "Brat, you're much more fun than your father." Damien taunted him and sent a kick into his stomach before he could respond. He charged several energies in his foot, imitating another attack he had. Should I also call this supernova? Boom! Shining light like a sun's splendor burned through the air and exploded into Bai Yuma's body, throwing him back and punching another hole in his figure. Damien gave chase to the receding figure, his blood runes shining as they gave him power. As he observed Bai Yuma's form, he realized that there were several similarities to his own demon transformation that had been neglected for so long. The reason for this neglect was its inability to support him in the battles he usually fought, but if he was able to glean answers from a fight against the Saint King, this ability would once again become a crucial part of his skill set. Damien and Bai Yuma were like shooting stars in the chaotic sky. While Damien observed him and made moves to counter, Bai Yuma did the same. The burning pain of the holes in his torso made his mind incredibly clear. At this moment, he was severely disadvantaged. As long as Damien could showcase such frightening healing capabilities, there was no such thing as a chance of winning. Bai Yuma gritted his teeth and put down his pride. This opponent was not someone he could limit himself in front of. He reached into his spatial ring and pulled out a certain device, watching as Damien approached with a blazing aura around his body. The time for the two to collide neared, and time slowed down. Seconds turned into infinite time spans of their own as the duo stared each other down, preparing their own methods to deal with each other once and for all. Until they finally connected. Damien's fist slammed into Bai Yuma's face, crashing through his armor and cracking his skull. Meanwhile, Bai Yuma reached his hand out and pushed the object he held into Damien's chest. That object turned liquid and entered Damien's body immediately, and despite being thrown back with heavy injuries again, Bai Yuma was content. Because as Damien found out soon enough, his body was being altered in a way he couldn't stop. The void had always had a single restriction. Its energy could only control and devour other energies. When Damien was exposed to natural poison back in the cloud plane, he learned this the hard way. And now, the substance that clouded his veins and set itself in his heart was showing the same tendencies. He could feel the difference. Transcendent regeneration is being blocked? Damien's shock was understandable. Even when his spatial abilities were blocked, transcendent regeneration never stopped working unless he had no mana. Whatever Bai Yuma put in his body was unseen in the universe, a treasure or material that couldn't be gauged by normal standards. It almost feels like the dark material from the primordial undying realm. If what those knocks had was a diluted version of the material, Bai Yuma had the source. What else could be expected from the son of the Saint Emperor? Damien frowned as he looked down at Bai Yuma, who was crawling out of the crushed ground. His injuries were far more severe. It looked like he was on the verge of death already. But as a Nox, death was a concept that didn't function the same for him. No matter how injured his body got, it wouldn't stop him from operating at full capacity. Damien was different. With his healing cut and no way of knowing how long it would take to get it back, Damien could no longer act rashly. He almost blew my head off a second ago. If that happens again, it was too dangerous. In this moment of respite, Damien's gaze unknowingly went to the Saint Emperor. That man was standing in the same position without any signs of movement, but the expression on his face was truly disgusting. It was slight, so slight that it couldn't be seen by others, but Damien saw it clearly. Because he knew what the Saint Emperor wanted. That look was one of perversion and one of desire, an expression that was validated by Damien and Bai Yuma's battle. Damien's frown deepened. He knew he had to defeat Bai Yuma here, but the longer the fight went on, the less sure he became of the Saint Emperor's intentions. He had the feeling that even if he won here, he would eat a loss. It was extremely disconcerting. The battle between Damien and Bai Yuma had already gone on for far longer than the previous one with Su Ren. Despite the fact that each of their collisions was like a leaf floating on the river of time, so many leaves covered the river's surface that one would believe it had no depth whatsoever. Hundreds of thousands of clashes took place, with the momentum shifting back and forth between the human and Nox. Their battle power shone in the eyes of those watching and placed them at the peak of the universe. But there could only be one person in the top spot. After Damien lost the protection of transcendent regeneration, his battle style became far more cautious. He utilized long-range attacks and constantly teleported to make sure Bayuma couldn't affect him with the same severity as before. But just as he became more cautious, the Saint King became more daring. The demonic providence granted to him by his training was Abyss Controller. He could take portions of the Abyss natural energy and use them as if they were his own mana. But this wasn't just a matter of using a different form of mana, it meant he could truly control the operations of the Abyss to a certain extent. And Damien was forced to face that head-on. Shit! Damien rapidly teleported away, moving several hundred kilometers across the arena floor, but it didn't help. The surrounding space had become a net that trapped him. Its chaotic fluctuations made it impossible for him to move freely despite the reality of his abilities. After all, unless the strength difference was significant enough, the only thing that could combat a spatial practitioner was another spatial practitioner. By influencing space directly, Bayuma effectively cornered Damien in a way he couldn't before. And he wasn't finished with just this much. The Saint King's arms waved through space like he was conducting an orchestra. However, the result of his actions was cacophony. The spatial turbulence was only one of many mechanisms he abused in this battle. As Damien tried to evade and counter using Mirage, as he tried to use the twin moons to create openings for himself to approach Bayuma, Damien was always met with obstructions. His body streaked through the air, avoiding a section of collapsed and twisted space, only for him to enter a new area where all things were darker than black. A dead zone, Damien exclaimed with a frown, remembering his last experience in such a place. There was an absence of mana and laws that made it impossible for even someone of his caliber to maintain their mana capacity properly. I need to escape this encirclement, Damien thought solemnly. He dragged his body through the dead zone, swerving to avoid the blasts of abyss energy that surrounded him from all sides. Damien's body was like an eel slithering through water, the terrain unable to affect his mobility much at all. But his mana capacity was finally beginning to see the negative effects. I need to get out of this dead zone to recuperate my mana, but it's hard. There's a time distortion here too, but I can't sense it since it's built into the absence of the dead zone. His mana was draining too rapidly for this destroyed area of space to be so simple, and realizing it, Damien's frown only deepened. Looks like I have to fight directly. Bayuma hadn't moved since the beginning of this new phase of the battle. While his expression made this seem like a taunting gesture or a show of arrogance, the reality was that it wasn't possible for him to move his body while controlling abyss energy so precisely. The state he was currently in was similar to Damien's elemental war god form, but because he didn't have the special physique that allowed him to easily control those elements he didn't have an affinity with, he needed to torture his body until his understanding of them was engraved deep in his soul. One day, when he was more powerful, perhaps he could effortlessly wield the forces of nature like his father. But this was a story for another time. Bayuma's eyes never left Damien, who was like a flying cockroach who refused to die. So when he saw the man come to a complete stop, his expression became somewhat serious. As he expected, Damien wasn't planning to run anymore. He summoned all the mana inside him and summoned his understanding of spacetime in full. Damien's eyes were closed as he felt for those laws in the lawless space, and when they fluttered open again, a translucent silver color decorated his pupils, and his hands moved with the elegance of an emperor. Form. He uttered a single word, and the dead zone around him shattered. A secure space was formed in its place, a semblance of order that displaced Bayuma's chaos. The battle changed again. Bayuma and Damien no longer moved or attacked each other in a frenzy. Their collision was a true battle of experts, where superior comprehension would take the victory. The laws of spacetime and the energy of the abyss clashed fiercely. When these two forces were put against each other, abyss energy had a natural advantage since it was more all-encompassing. But when Damien added samsara to the mix, and used elemental war god to imitate the addition of the 5 base elements, the same couldn't be said. It was a wave of black against a wave of silver, two waves of terrifying energy that clashed in the air and invaded each other's space to attack their casters. Yuma was covered in gashes and had several chunks of his body missing, eaten by space and time themselves. Meanwhile, Damien wasn't untouched either. Abyss energy couldn't pollute his internals, but it absolutely worked on his physical body. His skin and muscles were corroded and burned away by the second, and even his bones started to feel the searing heat of the energy melting them into nothingness. Nevertheless, he stood tall. The laws he'd been comprehending were those that formed the universe's very foundation, and when he faced abyss energy, he didn't feel fear or panic. He felt anticipation at what lay beyond the bounds of this small universe. He felt like if he could kidnap Yuma and study that energy for a few years, the secrets of the universe would be his. It was a shame that such energy was in the hands of the enemy. Damien sighed to himself, wincing as he burned his wounds closed with flames and lightning. This is it. I need to act now. The decision was made instinctively. Damien could feel that if he didn't charge in and capitalize on the opportunity now, he'd lose his chance to sweep the victory in the future. His hands went to his sides and the weapons he held disappeared from his grasp. The elemental war god state faded, and in the next second, the crown around Damien's head changed to a new form. Void-breathing second form? Absolute mastery. Last time, Damien used this ability on his sword skills, but not this time. This time, Damien's goal was to become a true god of space. The first time Damien used absolute mastery, the feeling of being a swordmaster was beautiful. It felt like he had an ultimate truth resting in his body, a truth that he wanted to hold on to. However, it was impossible to keep everything he gained from that state. At most, he could retain a few minor comprehensions. Still, the feeling that state gave him was something he'd never forget. And it wasn't something he could use often either. In his current estimates, he could at most use absolute mastery once a month. Regardless, it had been over a month since Damien and Surin fought, and absolute mastery activated perfectly. A feeling of godhood filled Damien's body again, extremely different from the last one. This time, it felt far more personal, far more indicative of Damien's future. But what did this feeling mean? Damien flexed his fingers and felt the folds of space abiding by his actions. It wasn't so simple, though, as this feeling equated to absolute control over their activities. Damien swung his arm out and space responded, swinging out as well. The base structure of the spatial folds changed to fit his needs, and a few layers even deleted themselves to accommodate his motions. Nice! Damien grinned and clenched his fist powerfully. Boom! Space shattered entirely, banishing every bit of Yuma's mana into the void. In the next instant, it reformed itself more solid and with different laws than before, containing the Saint King and attacking him from all sides. It was difficult for Yuma to describe what he was experiencing. He was dodging on instinct and crushing any sense of hostility he felt in the environment, but he couldn't get rid of the sensation of being squeezed to death at all. Space was his enemy. His very existence in its folds was being disallowed. Damien didn't have to move. He flicked his fingers like a pianist and moved his arms freely, conducting the movements of space with nothing more than his thoughts. Gashes and ruptures filled the air, black holes and spatial collapses filled it too. Space stretched and shortened at the same time, making distance an irrelevant concept. No matter how far Yuma moved, he couldn't make any distance. And no matter how much distance he made, space was always around to destroy him. This cannot continue. Damien and he were both restricted from healing, so whoever held the momentum also held the key to victory. With Damien's current state, Yuma had no chance of winning. Unless, I must unseal it. I never thought I would use this card against someone in my own generation. Yuma took a second to mull it over and hesitated no longer. His body underwent a secondary transformation, becoming far more demonic than its previous state. His hair was pure white and the armor that covered his body was reconstructed to look like the exoskeleton of a certain predator. His head was left uncovered, allowing others to witness the pristine handsomeness that it represented. The current form of the Saint King didn't just share similarities with Damien's demon transformation, it looked like a perfectly complete version of it. Begone! Bayuma's thoughts were utterly cold, but his movements were brutal. Bang! He slammed his arm to the side, shattering space itself and opening a hole into the chaotic void. He looked up at Damien with a grin and began to wildly attack the space around him. If it wasn't for the countless shattered spatial fragments falling to the ground and the revelation of the chaotic void, it would have looked like he'd gone mad. Damien frowned and tried to contain Bayuma in his spatial constraints, but the latter's physical strength had grown too much. Every time space existed around him, he destroyed its existence thoroughly. This won't work anymore. Damien stopped wasting his time immediately. He kicked off the air and shot forward, redirecting the energy of absolute mastery into his swordsmanship. Boom! Mirage crashed against the Saint King's heavy armor, sending sparks of light flying through the air. The duo began a fierce melee without a single care for their well-being. At this stage, whoever took the most damage would be the ultimate loser. As long as one of them was using their energy without care, the other didn't have any choice but to follow. Bang! 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 Boom! The scene was reminiscent of the previous fight. Bayuma didn't bring out his fan but used his fists, and Damien only had a single sword, but their exchanges shared a frightening and almost intentional similarity to Suren's battle. The fight had grown to such proportions and become a matter of life or death, but Damien never forgot his original purpose. He was going to get revenge for his comrade and show the Nox that Grand Heaven's boundary couldn't be easily touched. His sword was like a blur of light as he wielded it with absolute perfection, infusing space-time mana into its blade to heighten its effects. Meanwhile, Bayuma used Abyss energy to its fullest, creating disastrous microcosms that attacked Damien's body and tore into his flesh and bones. Both men were taking extreme injuries. They were missing chunks of their bodies and their limbs were destroyed to the point where it was curious how they were still functioning. Damien and Bayuma had the same thought at this moment, but Damien didn't plan to let his enemy entertain it. Boom! The laws of samsara in the atmosphere solidified further, and Damien used his new law controller trait to exponentially enhance its effects. At the same time, he sent his senses into his body and rapidly dissected the nature of the dark material within him. Damn it! Just die! Bayuma roared as he slammed his fist out. Cook! Why don't you go first? Damien responded, slashing Mirage into the Saint King's shoulder. They stared into each other's eyes with fiery determination and fighting spirit. Their killing intent soared into the heavens as they ripped each other apart. Damien sent void mana through his systems and encircled the dark material clogging his veins. He gathered the substance spread through his body into his heart, enduring extreme pain to the point where he almost lost his sanity. But he didn't stop. He put all his attention into this task, even ignoring the ongoing battle to a certain extent. In the outside world, Bayuma took the lead. Damien's resistance lessened and he capitalized on the chance to let loose an all-out attack that utterly destroyed Damien's body. His legs and arms were blown to shreds, and a massive hole populated his stomach, turning it into a window. Damien and Bayuma were no more than a few hits away from death already. But now, it seemed like Damien would die without resistance. Until, found it. The voice that came out was barely a mutter as Damien's vocal cords were incinerated, but the grin on his face spoke 10,000 words. Take this, bitch. Damien slammed his head forward into Bayuma's forehead, completely surprising the Nox genius. And, cook! He coughed a mouthful of black blood onto his enemy's face. Before Bayuma's face could reel in disgust, his eyes widened in absolute shock. As Damien, ha! A sigh left his mouth. It really was good to be back. In just a second, Damien's mutilated body returned to its peak state, fast to the point where it seemed like a miracle. And without waiting a single instant, he slammed his fist out with every last bit of power remaining in his body, intent on destroying Bayuma's heart once and for all. Time nearly froze. This was that moment. It was the moment when Bayuma felt true death encroaching him at the hands of another for the first time in his life. Damien's strike truly was beautiful. It was a colorful mixture of several equal and opposite laws, a strangely ordered mix of chaos that was bound to explode at the slightest disruption. How was he able to control something like that? The amount of effort it'd take to so precisely handle mana so these elements didn't prematurely connect was mind-boggling, and Bayuma was sure he wouldn't be able to replicate it. This time, his loss was completely undisputable. His opponent might have had strength similar to his, but his control over not only his mana, but his laws and physical body, made him someone Bayuma would lose to 9 out of 10 times no matter how much they fought. They said one's life would flash before their eyes on the verge of death. But Bayuma didn't see anything like that. What he saw in his final moments was a mountain. He was born at the foot of this mountain and had been so desperately trying to climb it his entire life. But it wasn't just difficult, it was impossible. No matter how hard he tried, no matter how much he grew, he could never make it more than a few hundred meters past its base. Now, with his chance to see the peak almost extinguished, he began to wonder. Why was he so obsessed with this mountain? Why did he allow it to control his life like so? His vision was shifting between blackness and a blurry view of the world. The closer Damien's fist came, the harder it was for him to stay conscious. And in that final moment, he saw that mountain again. Enough! Boom! A cold voice resounded before Damien's attack finally exploded. Waves of chaotic mana filled the space and, mysteriously enough, passed through the arena barrier like it didn't exist. Hush! Furious winds crashed through the atrium, accompanied by the panicked screams of the crowd. The demigods and supremes among them rapidly put up barriers to defend their juniors, marveling at the beautiful yet deadly impact of the explosion. It took several seconds for the storm to calm, and when the light and dust finally settled, gasp! A wave of gasps spread through the crowd. Standing in the middle of the arena, between Damien and Bayuma, was none other than the Saint Emperor. He held Damien's fist in his grasp, staring down at the human genius who coldly met his gaze. "Boy, release your hostility," he said calmly, ignoring the killing intent radiating off Damien's body in waves. Damien gritted his teeth as he felt the Saint Emperor's firm grip. This interruption was expected. There was no way the Saint Emperor would let his son die here. But he didn't seem the slightest bit angry about Damien's victory. He was even a bit happy about it. Damien sighed and retracted his killing intent, backing away as the Saint Emperor freed his fist. Humph! The Saint Emperor moved his hands behind his back and glanced at Damien. Not bad, he thought with a slight smile, feeling the barely noticeable burn mark on his palm. He didn't speak too many words from that point. He lifted Bayuma with his mana and flew out of the arena, turning to address the entire crowd in the atrium. This loss, this emperor will acknowledge it. As such a thing has taken place, this emperor will make a proposition. His eyes turned to Lucille. 2 years, he said. Let us call a ceasefire for 2 years. This was perhaps the greatest shock of the Grand Assembly thus far. The Saint Emperor himself was offering such a thing? Not a single person believed it wasn't a trick. What are your terms? Lucille responded calculatively. Just like the rest, he was certain the Nox Emperor would propose extremely restrictive terms. However, I will guarantee that my Nox race will not attack the boundaries of Ion for the next 2 years, and those above 4th class stationed in your universe will be retrieved. If any attack takes place without direct provocation, I will take responsibility and personally destroy those who disobey this treaty. And in return, your people will also be retracted from Ion, and the Saint Emperor smiled strangely as his eyes turned back to Damien. That man must be disallowed from participating in any plans your universe creates during these 2 years. When they pass, he will have a rematch with my son to determine the final winner among the younger generation. It was natural that many gazes turned to Damien. They'd witnessed his great victory moments ago, but there had to be a greater reason for the Saint Emperor paying specific attention to him. Damien had a frown on his face as he received their suspicion and admiration. He didn't have much of an opinion on the Saint Emperor's terms, except, why does he want me to fight the Saint King so much? Damien could find a million loopholes to abuse if he wanted to take part in the universe's matters, but the Saint Emperor's agenda continued to elude him. After all, the man's actions were too disordered. Nothing he did made sense in the grand scheme of things, and he seemed to help the universe just as much as he hurt it. The Marionette Lord was a confusing individual, but they had nothing on the Saint Emperor. Even among the Nox, he was an enigma. Lucille looked between Damien and the Saint Emperor several times as he tried to rationalize their connection with the information he had on Damien, and he paid attention to the reactions of his peers towards the Nox Emperor's proposition. If it was another emperor, nobody would trust their ability to speak for the entire Nox race, but the Saint Emperor truly held a special position among their race and showed several times in the past that he could control even those who shared his title. The terms were too good to be true, but if he was willing to seal this ceasefire with a mana oath, could it be doubted anymore? There were too many questions about intention or long-term benefits and disadvantages that made one hesitate when facing a deal like this. However, Lucille couldn't deny that this was the best course of action for the universe at the moment. He looked at Damien one more time, and Damien met his gaze with a helpless shrug. Lucille smiled slightly and nodded before turning his attention back to the enemy leader. Very well. We are willing to accept these terms. His words were the start of something great, and also the signal that marked the start of the coming calamity. The Saint Emperor smiled with a hidden glint in his eyes. His expression was arrogant, as if he just achieved a victory under everyone's noses. And without hesitation, he summoned his mana and made an oath with the lives of his entire race on the line. All that was left was for the universe to return his sincerity. The ceasefire was signed and put into motion almost immediately, and results showed with the same haste. The Saint Emperor shared a few parting words, letting the universe remember that this loss didn't discount the threat the Nox represented, and left with his people. The expression on the Saint King's face as he was carried away was dull, almost void. It seemed there was a lot he needed to sort out in his head before he could return to his normal state. Or perhaps, his normal state was something the universe would never see again. Reports came in within minutes of demigods fleeing infected source worlds and many hidden locations throughout the universe. While it felt prideful to watch them leave, it also alerted the denizens of Grand Heaven's boundary to just how deeply the Nox had infiltrated their homeland. While the Grand Assembly was winding down for the most part, Damien still had a load of trouble to deal with. Namely, explaining away the many mysteries he'd showcased over the past few months. Luckily, he had both explanations and alibis galore, prepared for several days for this very moment. Firstly, the sanctuary was explained away as a god-rank spatial talisman. He claimed it had a limited number of uses, and when he teleported Schwer in and out of Holy Light Star, or when he teleported Xiaoyu to safety, he'd used up almost all its energy. This story was backed by several factors. Firstly, Damien claimed this talisman as the reason he could move around the universe so fast. It was still unheard of for a spatial practitioner to have Damien's level of movement ability, so when he gave a rational reason for how he got from the Celestial Realm to Ion, or from Soul World to the Beast Domain, it was widely accepted by the Council of Experts that was judging him. Surin also spoke up, saying his master had arranged Xiao Yu's secret return, which, when considering his master's identity, wasn't actually that strange. The issue of the sanctuary was solved there, but Damien had to be careful when he used the ability in the future to avoid further suspicion. Once the first problem was passed, he had to explain many more things, the first of which were Riva and Schwer herself. Riva was forgotten by most because of the negative presence she held and her early disappearance from relevance, but these experts still remembered her. As Damien was from the human domain, he was naturally asked about her. In this matter, feigning ignorance was easy since his interaction with Riva was hidden from their sight from the beginning. They asked everyone from the human domain about her, so he didn't have to worry about weaving a complicated history for her. As for Schwer, was there a need to lie about her identity? She was his precious little sister, nothing more, nothing less. The main issue was rationalizing abilities like absolute mastery and elemental war god. He had to give an explanation for the great variety of natural forces and mysterious powers that he commanded. The experts of Grand Heaven's boundary definitely didn't doubt Damien's loyalty, as he wouldn't have shown so many cards if he was a traitor, but they did doubt how someone from a small planet in the human domain could grow so much and gain so many things that were unheard of for many. Damien could only entertain their suspicions and give them semi-reasonable excuses to satisfy their curiosity. Regardless of their status or the importance of this moment, Damien wasn't someone who'd bend to authority. Why should he give them so much information on him? Why would he let them hold power over him? Damien was always an independent genius, and he'd never truly given his allegiance to any force because of the disgust he felt working for others. So, while he did answer their questions, he didn't give them what he wanted. He blamed mysterious masters, heaven-defying lucky opportunities, and even the universe itself for his rise to power. And what could these experts do but accept it? There was no other logical explanation for his existence. The only ones who still held doubts in their hearts were Lucille, Lucifer, and a few experts who personally knew Damien, but they didn't comment on his lies for a variety of reasons. Nevertheless, the hellish interrogation lasted several hours before Damien was finally let go. His status in the universe now far surpassed Su Ren's, and though he hadn't visited any mystic realms or challenge gates in the recent past, his name now sat crisply in the first-place position on the dimensional leaderboard. Damien Void was no longer someone who could move about the universe as he pleased, a stranger in every new land he visited. Within a few months of the Grand Assembly, he became a household name that could be recognized at first sight. He was the genius who defeated the Saint King, with the final event marked by Damien and by Yuma's battle, which led to something that surprised any and everyone who heard it. The Grand Assembly came to a close. Many forces had already left Luxurian when the conference started since they didn't have the right to participate, and now that it was over, the rest made their way out as well. Chatter was vibrant among them as they made their exit, and despite the painful events that had taken place earlier and led to the loss of thousands of promising young talents, their atmosphere was jolly. The Grand Assembly gave them hope for the future, hope for victory. However, there were a few forces who didn't share their joy, mostly those who were aligned with Blood Azura Holy Land. Immortal Blood Azura spoke no words as he coldly led his people away from Luxurian, but anyone who saw the look in his eyes backed away in fear. He was absolutely furious. Damien would definitely face troubles from them in the future, but now that they were faced with such an outcome, it was impossible for them to openly hinder him without offending nearly every big force in the universe. Though this only meant Immortal Blood Azura's revenge would be 10 or even 100-fold worse than it would have been. Damien himself didn't pay any mind to Blood Azura Holy Land at this time. While everyone else made their way back to their homes to prepare for the grand plans that would be enacted soon enough, he and 49 other geniuses who represented the younger generation's absolute peak were gathered together in the first banquet hall. Among them, all of the human domain's geniuses, Surin, Atticus, and a few others were familiar. At the head of their group was Pandora, who stood with her fellows and the sect elders who accompanied them to Luxurian. This was the group Prismatic Sun Holy Land had invited to their lands, the first outsiders to gain this privilege for tens of thousands of years, if not more. Perhaps the Grand Assembly was over, but this was only the start. The true war between Grand Heaven's boundary and the Nox was just on the verge of entering its true stage, where war would envelop all of existence. Damien glanced at Pandora from his place in the crowd with a smile. He truly was anticipating this next step of his legend.